Inmate Gerber, Tycho to his friends, slumped into the cell as Sergeant Richardson pushed him in. It was so stupid. It was nothing but a misunderstanding. He'd been scrapping over gambling debt. Nothing out of the ordinary, but he supposed that this time the debtor had opened his big mouth. They had found him with the repaid debt in his locker, and he supposed that's how he had gotten stuck with a charge for stealing. Now he was looking at 30 days in the hole. It was going to feel like 30 years. So Tycho settled in and just hoped that they wouldn't put anyone in the cell that was crazy. Still, he thought to himself, as he lay on the bunk that would be his for the next month, it'd be nice to have someone to talk to. It had been early afternoon when he got locked up, and as afternoon swept towards evening, Tycho began to imagine that he saw something along the wall of his cell. The cell was pretty standard for confinement, a large silver toilet in the corner, a metal sink built into the top of it, and one of the warped-looking mirrors over that. It wasn't a real mirror, not like the one he had at home, but it was semi-reflective, and it worked well enough, he supposed. There was a weird light playing across the wall, and whatever it was being caught by the mirror, too. He rolled over to face the wall as dark settled over the cell. All around him he could hear other inmates in other cells calling out to their friends and those they might come to know. There was singing, chatter, guessing games, and all kinds of things going around. Tycho didn't really know anyone in this part of confinement, and he wasn't really in the mood to talk to anybody. It didn't appear it was shower night on this side, so all he could do was sit here and wait for breakfast. He was getting sleepy, his eyes beginning to close, when he saw something that took all the sleep right out of him. One of the officers, or one of the orderlies more likely, had bumped his door and woken him up again. He had glanced over to make sure that no one was creeping up on him when he saw someone looking out the mirror at him. It wasn't uncommon to see a face in the mirror, but it was usually your own face. Tycho got up and moved to look in the mirror, but it was just his face now. Tycho was pretty certain on what he had seen, but as he went back to his pallet, he supposed he could have been mistaken. Who knew with this place, right? Tycho had been in and out of jail or prison since he was 17, but this place took the cake. He had never believed in ghosts or monsters, not even when he was a kid, but he believed that if there was ever a place they could be, it'd be Stragview. He'd seen things here, and he'd heard stories about worse things. Rats that would eat people alive, monsters under the grass, and so many ghosts that it wasn't even funny. Confinement was especially bad, and an extra face in the mirror, well, that wouldn't surprise him in the least bit. As he dozed off, Tycho thought how he couldn't wait to be free of this place in another 2 years. He just hoped it would go by quickly. For the next few days, Tycho had paced around the cell and waited for it all to be over. He took a shower the next night, went out for rec a few times, and mostly just rolled time. 5 days felt like 50 days as he sat there and watched the sun rise and fall. And that wasn't the only thing that he watched. The longer he stayed in the cell, the more it seemed like the mirror, or the face within it, was watching him. It was a strange thing to worry about, Tycho realized, but he couldn't help it. Sometimes, when he was brushing his teeth or washing his hands, he would see his own face looking back at him. That was okay, expected even, but when he was lying on his bed or sitting to have a meal or taking a dump, he would sometimes feel unfamiliar eyes on him. It wasn't as if he didn't know what his own face looked like. He'd seen it often enough, and he knew that this was not his own face. It was pale, the hair very short, and the eyes were wider than any he had ever seen. Tycho was a little intimidated at first, remembering the stories about the face and the wall, but it's hard to stay afraid forever. The warden would have said that was untrue, but most of the time it's just hard to stay scared. When Friday came around and his lunch was cold, Tycho's temper flared. He sighed as he picked at it, trying to find something edible in the cold nothing. And that's when he saw the face. It was watching him eat, watching his misery, and in that moment, Tycho forgot to be afraid. "It's rude to stare, you know," he said, tossing a piece of cornbread at the small mirror. "If you're gonna hang out, then at least talk or something." He hadn't really expected an answer. He was just pissed off and lashing out. But when someone spoke up, he was startled. "Sorry, no one's ever noticed me before. Didn't expect you'd be any different." Tycho glanced back at the mirror and saw the same face looking back at him again. It was bald, pale, and the eyes were a little too big. Tycho, however, was pretty bored after 5 days sitting alone, and he couldn't think of anything else to do. He set his unappetizing tray aside and went to stand in front of the little mirror. His own reflection never arrived to take its place, and as the other grinned at him, his teeth gapped and brown, he found the grin infectious. "It's been ages since I've had anybody to talk to. My name's Cato, and you are?" Tycho introduced himself, and the two began to talk. Tycho sat backwards on the toilet, looking up slightly at the mirror. The two talked about the prison, about how they had come to be in prison, about their homes, their families, and 1,000 other things. Cato, as it turned out, was a car thief. He would have gone to Arendelle with the other normal inmates, but on his last carjacking, Cato had assaulted an old lady and caught 25 years. He had been in and out of confinement, fighting mostly, and that was how he had come to be in this very cell. Tycho blinked, realizing it had become dark while he was getting to know his new friend. "So, how did you get in that mirror?" Tycho asked. "Well, that's a good one. If you have the time, I think I've got enough time to tell it." Tycho shrugged. "We're in the hole, buddy. We got nothing but time." Cato laughed. "Fair enough. Well, it was, who knows, a while ago. I was in the hole for fighting, as usual, and I noticed someone watching me, much like you had. He said his name was Charlie, and that he was not in prison, but in a different place. He told me he'd been there for a long time, and that he had found the mirror and liked watching people in it. Sometimes he talked to them, most times he didn't, but he liked listening to the stories that he heard when the two of them were in there. He told me things about people in here and plans they made, and we spent a while talking about who was planning to attack who, and who was planning to open a store, and who was going to start doing what. It was kind of neat to have the inside scoop on so many different things, and I sent out a lot of kites in those days so that I could tell my friends what to expect. I wasn't really a big bug on the compound or anything, and I think you realized this when I didn't have a lot of secrets to share. We talked a lot about home and how much I wanted to get out of here. Then he told me something really interesting. The flap rattled then, the lights coming on overhead as breakfast came in. Tycho looked up into the mirror and saw that Cato was gone. The guard put the tip of the boot that he wore against the door and asked if Tycho wanted the tray or not. When Tycho sat to eat his breakfast, the flap closing behind him, Cato was back again. He scowled at the door, clearly not a big fan of the guards, and watched Tycho eat his middling breakfast. "Doesn't look like much," he commented. "It's not too bad," Tycho said. "It's 2 coffee cake day, and there's oatmeal and juice, too." As if to prove his point, Cato lifted a tasty-looking pastry and took a bite. Tycho hadn't seen anything like that in a long time, not since the ones his mother used to bring home from the bakery when he was younger, and it made his mouth water. He wondered if he could put things through the mirror so he could have a taste, but he supposed that if he could, then Cato probably wouldn't be in there. "Where'd you get that?" Tycho asked, putting his own breakfast aside. "There's a lot of it in here, and lots of other mirrors to peek through, too. That's how I entertain myself, usually. I can pop to the other mirrors in the other cells and the mirrors in other dorms and listen to people's conversations and just have a grand old time. Tycho thought that sounded like a lot of fun. It'd be kind of cool to go to different places and eavesdrop on people. And he thought of a comic he had read as a kid about a shadow that knew people's secrets and used them to break their schemes and crimes. He thought it had been called something like Fontana or Phantomos or something like that, and he looked at his new friend in a different light now. Wow, I'd love to do something like that. Cato looked at him cagily. Well, maybe you could. Tycho was instantly interested. Oh, yeah? Yeah, you see, I want to come out and see the world. My world is nice and all, but I want to see what your world is like. Well, just come out then. Can't you leave the mirror? Unfortunately not, Cato said. I have to swap places with someone in order to leave. It's a weird rule. You said you liked the sound of it, though. Why not come and trade with me? Tycho got excited. He didn't know that was an option. He could come into the mirror place and let Cato hang out at Stragview. Didn't seem like a great deal. Cato didn't realize he was walking into a prison instead of a place that he could be free, but Tycho thought maybe they would let him go since he hadn't committed any crimes and didn't have any charges that they could use to hold him. He would probably have some explaining to do, but ultimately Tycho didn't think much about it. This was what he wanted and what the other guy wanted, so why not do it? So, how does it work? Do I need to cut my palm or something? Nothing like that. What you have to do is put your hand on the mirror and say, reflection in, reflection out, 3 times, and we'll swap places. Tycho put a hand to the cold surface of the mirror, repeated the phrase 3 times as he closed his eyes, and prepared for what was to come. In retrospect, he probably should have thought about it a little bit more, but Tycho had always been what you would call impetuous. It's what had got him into so many fights and what brought him to confinement so often. When he wanted something, he took it, and when somebody disrespected him, he beat them. So he hadn't really thought much about it when he decided to swap places. He saw it as a quick in, quick out, and why wouldn't he? Tycho expected to open his eyes and find that it had all been some kind of delusion. Instead, he opened his eyes to find himself in a weird stone structure. It reminded him of a poster his cousin had owned, the one with the weird stairwells that defied gravity, and the walls of that off place were covered in mirrors. He turned back to the mirror that he had come through and saw Cato standing in his cell and smiling at him. Cato thanked him for releasing him from his prison, and then to Tycho's surprise, he simply walked through the metal door and vanished. Tycho watched the guards as they searched through the cell when they found it was empty, but he was careful not to let them see him. What could they do if they saw him? They couldn't force him out of the mirror, and he knew it. He watched them leave again, grousing and shaking their heads, and with the cell empty, he began to explore his new home. He found a kitchen that seemed to have an ever-replenishing stock of food, a bedroom with a lumpy-looking bed, and a library full of books. Tycho wasn't much for reading, but he liked the idea of filling his belly until he'd gotten enough. The pantries were full of good things to eat, cakes and pies and meats and cheeses and the kind of things that Tycho had been missing since coming here. He ate and ate until his belly was full to bursting, and once that was done, Tycho set about watching the compound through the mirrors. This proved to be very entertaining for a while. Tycho went from mirror to mirror, listening to conversations and learning the secrets of the compound. It turned out that it wasn't just the dorm mirrors, but the mirrors that sat anywhere on the compound. Mirrors in offices, mirrors on desks, mirrors in bathrooms, and the secrets he learned were delicious. He wrote them down, discovering that many of the books in the library were also books of secrets, and over time, he had discovered secret relationships, drug rings, murder plots, and everything in between. The problem was that there was no one to tell these secrets to. He tried to make himself known to some, but they either thought this was a trick or thought he was a demon of some kind. They ran from him, or they scoffed at him, and after a while, he stopped trying to talk to people. He lost track of time. Days and weeks bled together. And Tycho had to come to terms with the fact that he was trapped. He'd been tricked by the creature that had called itself Cato, and it seemed that he would never leave this place again. The warden listened to the story as the fellow in the mirror finished it. The crafty old demon was coming to realize that he wasn't the only one of his kind in Stragview, and the thought did not cheer him. What did cheer him, however, was the thought of having a spy inside his prison, a spy that could be used to help him. I believe you, Tycho. I'd be glad to listen to your secrets, old and new. The man in the mirror smiled, glad to have someone who would talk to him at long last. The warden smiled too. It appeared he had another ally in his war against the things that threatened his prison. You're still here. Thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague here. Always a pleasure to see all my new and old viewers coming by for another one of my spooky tales. If you'd like to support the show, you can always take part in one of our channel offers through Fume or Aura, or you can just click on another video when they come up. I'd really appreciate it. For our newer viewers, we also have lots of playlists and other things if you'd like to get caught up. I know some of my series have been going on for quite a while. If you'd like to get my latest book, there's a link down below that'll take you to my Amazon page. Towesey Homestead just came out, so if that's something you'd like to get your hands on, go ahead and have a look down there. If you'd like a signed copy, you can go ahead and email me from my email address on the site, and I'll get with you about shipping information and ship you a signed copy. If you'd like to support the channel in a more monetary fashion, we also have membership through YouTube, and we've got a Patreon that you can get the information for in the description. We have lots of tiers and everything to suit your needs. Patrons that support on the $10 tier, that's our Ghostly Reader tier, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep. As you may have noticed, there's a list of patrons and members on the screen, and I'd like to personally thank every one of them for taking a hand in the future of this channel. Well, that's enough for tonight. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.